Here's a reports project that I created using ASP.NET MVC, using version 4.5 of the .NET framework. So what this does is it has a home controller that contains a run report action method, which demonstrates how you can integrate reporting services into your web application. So I'm going to first go ahead and run the application. I'm going to run it using Internet Explorer. And I am logged in as an administrator, so I ran Visual Studio as administrator. So I'm going to have all the proper permissions on my local instance of reporting services. So I'll click on that, it'll compile the project, and run it. And there you can see the page. This is the home page, the index for the application. So most of the page consists of static links that I've used in other courses or other parts of the course. But here's the one that now I'm dynamically creating a URL that I'm going to execute. And as you can see by the tooltip at the bottom left of the screen, it shows that I'm accessing the local host. It's using IIS Express, so it's using port 57015, the home controller, and the run report action method. And so what happens when I run that is it opens up this page that displays information about the report that I want to run. Specifies the server, so that's the base part of the URL, the folder where the report is located, the name of the report, category sales by year, the format that I want. Now this is the default format, so I don't really need to specify that, but I wanted to make it explicit. And then the full URL that I've dynamically created. So as you can see, it's using the shortcut version of the URL, which is localhost report server, the name that I defined in configuring this instance of reporting services, the folder that I want, the report that I want, and then the command to render it in HTML 4.0. And now I can hover over the execute the report, and again down the lower left you can see that same, or at least a part of that same URL. I can click on it, and it displays the report. And I didn't do anything to change the HTML viewer, so that appears. There's no parameters required, so the parameters pane doesn't appear, but I get the report using a URL that I dynamically created within my application. That's what's cool about this particular example. Okay, so let's shut this down and take a look at the pieces of the application. So I'm going to go into the controllers. Again, this is an ASP.NET MVC application. And I have the home controller, which, using convention over configuration, is the default controller. It's essentially the starting point of the application. So I have an index that displays that initial page that's mostly full of static links. And so I have a view defined where I've defined all of those individual links. And we'll look at that shortly. What's interesting here is, for this particular example, is this run report action method. So it starts by defining a couple of string values. So this is the name of the report, category sales by year, and the format that I want. So this is the information that is going to vary in the different action methods. So I'm defining this within the action method. I also have a couple of globals here to specify the report server, localhost report server, and sample reports. The scenario is that this particular application is only going to use reports that are in the sample reports folder. So I'm defining that as a constant. That way I don't have to worry about overriding that and introducing bugs into the application. And then in this very simple example, I then concatenate together the URL. Start with the report server, so that's the domain and the virtual directory. Concatenate on that question mark slash, putting in the report folder, putting in another slash, the report name, which is category sales by year, and then I need that command equals render, and then specifying the format, and I'm reading that format that I've defined right there. Now, I'm setting these values as strings within the method, but I could prompt the user for that information. I could have drop-down list boxes. I could read a database. I could read a configuration file. Whatever it is that I need to do in order to get that data, in order to craft that specific URL. Now, then I want to display and this is for the purposes of this sample application, I want to display information about that report. Remember that header information at the top of the report that listed all the different pieces. So I have a report view model and defining an RVM. And so if I go over here into the models section of the application, you can see the report view model. And so as you can see, that's just a very simple class that I'm going to use to pass the information. Actually, the technical term is I'm going to use as a view model when I display the run report view. And so if I go back over to the home controller, you can see that I'm newing up a report view model object there and specifying the different values for its properties. All right, so at that point, everything is done, and I use a view action result, or the view method, to create an action result, passing in that report view model, and that's how I end up with that result. So I'll run the application again. And scroll down to the bottom, back to that URL right there. So this is the data that's in the report view model. So within the view, I just simply have to read that data and present it in whatever format that I want. And then I can execute the report. Okay, and then the last little piece is the two views. So the first view I have is index. So this is that page that mostly has static links. So I have a reference, I have some text, and then I display, again for the purposes of the sample, to make it easy to show you what's happening with the different URLs. I'm displaying the URL as well. Obviously you won't do that in a typical application. Okay, but then coming down here is the dynamic part of it. So I'm using an action link to include a link on the bottom of the page that in this case says execute a report and specifies that run report action method. So again, I'll run this. And scroll down to the bottom, and that creates that link to that run report. That's a nice benefit of using an MVC application. All right, the last couple of details to look at are the views that are involved in that interaction. So I'll go over here to Solution Explorer, and down here in the Home section, the first view is that index. So this is that starting page that mostly has static links. So most of the page just has reference to the different things that I've been showing in terms of using customized URLs. And in this page, I display the URL, just making it easier to show you what the URL looks like rather than trying to scroll around the address bar in a browser. Now the part we're concerned with here is all the way at the bottom, these HTML action links. And here's the first one, the one that I've been executing. And so what this does is it executes that run report action method, which then sets up all of the data for that second page that displays the different items that are going into the URL. And then from that run report action method, it displays the run report view. All right, so I'll go over to Solution Explorer and open up run report. And so this is the view that displays pieces that are going to go into that URL on the page using typical ASP.NET MVC HTML code. And then it has this link right here that displays the URL that is part of that report view model. If we go back over here, that's that property right there, and I set that property in the run report action method. And so that displays it as literal text or within that href attribute of the anchor tag. And then that's the link that I clicked on to actually execute the report at the specific location and the name of the reports and so forth. And then there's another action link at the bottom. I didn't click this one, but it just goes back to that index page. Strictly speaking, it's saying it's a link to execute that index method. Okay, so there's really nothing magical going on here. The application is just using a bit of code in the context of an ASP.NET MVC application to dynamically build a report from a set of pieces contained in variables. But it shows how easy it is to do, and hopefully opens up your awareness to the possibilities of using a dynamic method like this, such as if you need to pass parameters to the report. So let's talk about that case now. Okay, so you can be very creative in how you write an application that displays a report to an end user, adding whatever properties you want to the URL. I've added just a couple that were needed to display the basic report. And then you can build that URL dynamically and redirect. Now what I'm going to do is show you how you can let the user display the reseller cumulative sales with various options. So you display a page, give them options, and then once they've selected the options, send them to the report. And in this particular case, you're going to let them set the required parameter values and select an output format. Okay, now, like the run report sample that I just showed you, the run parameterized report, that page renders the report directly to an output format, so the application can be run in most browsers. This example differs from run report in a few ways. And I'll go ahead and run it so you can see what I'm talking about. Oops. I'll go back to the list. I was on that page in the application, so it opened up that view. So this is the link that I wanted. So this is the new page. As you can see at the bottom, this is running the run parameterized report action method, and then displays this view. All right, so the first thing happening here is that I have 3 drop-down boxes that let the user make selections for the 3 parameters, territory, year, and quarter. And then it uses those in order to set the parameters, pass them through the URL. And then this 4th drop-down list box lets the user select the output format that includes HTML4, MHTML, PDF, and so forth. Basically all the same options as the user would get from Report Manager. And then finally, the other difference is that rather than displaying a static link like Run Report had, this one has a View Report button that calls an action method in the home controller. Then this method, that action method, takes the user selections, builds the custom report URL, and then redirects to the report display page. All right, and then it's also using that same view model here to display the information, but this time we can't use all of the selections. We can't pre-select format. We could, but in this case the user has to select it, so I just include that as a string. And then the URL, we don't know what it is yet because we don't know the user selections, so I just indicate that it's dynamically built. All right, so obviously in a real application you're not going to provide that kind of information, although you might identify what server it is or things like that. But this is just for the sake of this demonstration. But this is real. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. As you can tell, I'm a developer. I'm not a user interface designer, not the most beautiful thing, but you can certainly make this as beautiful and functional as you want. Okay, so all of this is implemented as an ASP.NET MVC controller and view. All right, so to continue on, let's select North America. I'll stick with 2007, Q1, HTML4, and view the report, and it loads it, and there we have just North America. So you can see the document map. We don't have any of the other continents that are available as part of the default values or part of the data set for this report. All right, so in order to implement this, it has to be a little bit more complex. And in particular, these are not static values. I'm not populating a drop-down list box with static values. Well, I am in one case, but I'll show you that. But I'm actually reading values from the database. All right, so I'm going to end this, and we'll look at the different parts of the application. So the first thing is down here under Models. I talked about the report view model before, but I also have an entity framework model that includes just 3 tables from the AdventureWorks DW 2012 database. So the DIM date, fact reseller sale, and DIM sales territory. So 2-dimension tables and 1 fact table. These are the tables that I need in order to get the valid values for the territory and year drop-down boxes. All right, so I just created that using the wizard. I didn't spend any time cleaning up the model. In a real application, I would have made the names a little bit more usable, cleaned up the fields, probably eliminated a lot of the fields. This is only a read-only model. I'm just getting data from the database and so forth. So I didn't do that. I just took what the Entity Framework Data Model Wizard gave me and used it within the application. So again, just to kind of keep things simple. All right, top level object is called AWDW entities. And so this is the way that I get the data for those drop-down list boxes. Now, very, very, very important to understand that this Entity Framework model is not used in the application to retrieve any data for the report itself when the report is rendered. All of the data access code for the report itself is contained within the report definition. All I'm doing here is retrieving the values for those drop-down list boxes. Okay, so be clear on that. All right, now, in order to implement this, I have to go back over to the home controller. And I first of all have a global variable called, well, global within this class, variable called AWDW, which instantiates that AWDW entities object that is the entry point into that Entity Framework model that I can use in order to access the data. The only reason I did this is because I'm using this in two different methods. Easier to do it once, create it, and have it available. On the other hand, it's not used by all action methods. So, you know how you do that, personal coding style. Just keeping it simple here. All right, now I have two action methods because I first have to display the page with the options, run the code that generates the data for those drop-down list boxes, and then I have to have a second action method that is an HTTP post down here that then receives the user selections from those drop-down list boxes. Okay, now I know this is HTTP GET because I don't have HTTP. I don't have any attribute there. This is HTTP post. I have to include that attribute because that's not the default. Okay, so like run report, I then have a few variables where I'm just populating what I need for the application for this action method. So I'm selecting the report name, reseller cumulative sales. Here is where I set that format to must select and dynamically built. So that's literally what is displayed on the page. I'm not going to use that as part of the URL. And then here's where I go in and get the data for the territories and years. So I have this Entity Framework model. There's this collection of all the objects within DIM sales territories. And so I'm going to access that, sorting it by the sales territory group because I want to present them to the user in alphabetical order. And then I want to, from all of the fields available, select just the sales territory group. And then I only want distinct values, and I convert that to a list, which makes it easier to populate a drop-down list box using an MVC application in an MVC view in order to display that information. All right, now I prefer the method-based format of link expressions. So this is just a link expression, but you can use the other method where you actually have from whatever, select whatever, and so forth. Okay, this does the same thing, just a personal preference that I prefer this method-based syntax. You have access to the full features of Entity Framework, and in my object-oriented brain, it just makes more sense to me. But use whichever syntax works for you. Okay, then I do the same thing where I grab the years. Once again, those are in dates. I'm going to order by the calendar year, select the calendar year, select the distinct dates, and then once again convert that to a list. So pretty easy stuff. And then the quarters, most of the years have quarters, not all do, but it was just easier to go ahead and generate a list of static values. Now the report itself does have code if you're interested. The reseller cumulative sales has code because it has to actually get the set of quarters that are available for each year. And then I also have a static array of the different formats that the user can select. But if I really wanted to, I could execute some code and find out from reporting services what are available. Okay, then the next thing I do is I'm going to use the view bag. This is one of the two main ways of communicating data from an MVC controller to a view. So I'm going to create a territories dynamic property and create a new select list. That's a really nice object that makes it easy to populate a drop-down list box with data, with list data. And then I just pass that to the constructor of select list. Makes it really easy. All right, and then I have years. I do the same thing there. Populate that select list object with that years that we returned from this link expression. And then one kind of weird thing here is that I wanted to set the default year to 2007. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what the ranges are. I think it's like 2006 to 2010, something like that. But I wanted the default to be 2007, so I could show you this. It turns out the way to do that with the select list is to create another property on the view bag that is the same name as the drop-down list in the view. And I'll show you that. So the drop-down list is called year. So by setting a value to year, this becomes the default value as long as that value appears in that list of years. Okay, so years has the contents and year is the default setting. All right, then I can do the same thing with quarters. Nice thing is that I can use the result of the to list. I can do the same thing with a direct array like that. And now I'm passing all of that data to the view bag that's going to be automatically passed to the view when I execute that view. All right, then same thing as run report. I populate the report view model with the different values there because this is the information that the post action method is going to use in order to create that URL. But actually here, I'm just displaying it on the page. All right, so once again, want to show you this. I'm going to select, oh, I don't have it open yet. So I'll just go ahead and execute it. I was going to select the particular view so it went straight to it, but this is just as easy. All right, scroll down here, go to that page once again. So again, when I click this link, it's going to execute the action method that I just went through with you. That version of the run parameterized report action method. Does that, gets that information, populates the view model, displays at the top here, and builds all of the drop-down list boxes and dynamically displays that information. So I can select these, I can see the different areas that are available, I can see the years, so it is 2005 through 2010. Oddly enough, I didn't pursue this, but even though I use the order by, it's not sorting them, so there's some little thing wrong with my link expression, not a big deal. And then here's that static list of quarters and all of the formats that are available. Okay, so that's what we've done so far. Let me go ahead and show you that view at this point. So come over here, and here's the run parameterized report. So once again, it displays the data in that view model. And then it uses a form because I actually am going to pass this data using an HTTP post action. So I need to put that in a form, so I use the html.begin form. And then here's the code that builds each of those 4 drop-down list boxes. And I have them sorted out into a table, one of many ways to display these. So I do an HTML drop-down list, pass in the name, so this is going to be the name of the object within the HTML page. And then I read the value of the territories view bag property, cast it as a select list because this will just return a system.object. And then by passing that in as the second parameter, MVC takes care of populating that drop-down list box with all of the available territories. And then the same thing happens for year, for quarter, and format. And then there's my submit button. So this is just going to post back to this same page, which is going to cause that other action method to execute. And then I also again have the link at the bottom, the action link at the bottom, that lets me return to index. All right, so that's how that page works. So now let's go back over to controller. I'll clean up some of my items here. We're done with run reports and view model. And go back over to the home controller. And now when the user clicks that link in that page, in that view, it's going to execute this form of it. So it's an HTTP post, so it's going to be looking for data passed through a standard HTML post request. And it passes in parameters. Because I named these the same things as those objects in the page, territory, year, quarter, and format. If I come back over here, territory, year, quarter, and format, MVC will automatically read the value that was passed in the post method and populate these variables with the values that the user selected. Okay? So that's one of the many nice things about ASP.NET MVC applications. At this point, I just need to build a URL and go to it. So I set the report value to reseller cumulative sales. And then I build the URL, same as I did in run report, just concatenating all that stuff together. But the difference here is that I'm also passing in values for each of the parameters. And so, because I'm passing the value of those report parameters as part of the URL, it's going to render the report using those parameters. Pretty easy. All right, and then finally I just return a redirect action result, and this tells MVC to just issue a redirect to the browser, passing to that URL. Okay, let's go ahead and run it again. I'll scroll down to the bottom, execute this. Okay, so that's executing the first action method. I make selections. I'll use 2008 instead. I'll use Q2. And I'll leave the HTML format, just be easier to view it as an HTML page. And I'll view the report. That executes the second action method, creates this dynamic URL. It actually redirects to a slightly different one, includes the values that I selected, and renders the report. All right, so there's a little bit more complex example of how you can dynamically build these URLs within your application, and in this case, getting input from the user. Now, one caution about this process. A parameterized report will not immediately execute if it doesn't have valid values for all of the required parameters. For example, even though the reseller cumulative sales report lists the quarters as Q1, Q2, and so on. So if I select this drop-down list box here, it's Q1, Q2, and actually there aren't a full set of quarters available as part of 2008, so I'm only getting that small set of quarters. So if I come back over here, select them all, now they're all available because I'm selecting all of the available years. But this is all happening within the report itself, not happening within my application. My application is idle at this point. But that shows how this is dynamically, the report itself is dynamically getting the valid values for those particular parameters. So anyway, even though these are listed as strings Q1, Q2, Q3, and so forth, the underlying query requires just the integer value to retrieve the data. And I have to admit that when I was designing this application, I initially forgot that little detail of the report design. So I was passing the string Q1 in the URL as the parameter value. So since that's not a valid value for the parameter, it needs to be simply 1 if it's Q1, 2 if it's Q2, and so forth. The report wouldn't render, and the quarter selection box was empty when I rendered it to the HTML. Fortunately, this was an easy fix when I realized the problem, and I just used the string remove method in order to strip off the Q. So I can show you that if I come back over to the code here. That's why I have that little remove method right there. I'm just stripping off that Q single character and returning that the remaining integer value from Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4. And simply returning the integer value from Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4.